Hello, my name is Eric Janssen, and in normal years, I teach sales at the Ivy Business School. Last year, however, was not a normal year, because in addition to being a father, in addition to being a teacher, I'm also a father to 4 young children. I know. My wife and I decided to do something a little bit abnormal by most standards. We decided to pull the kids out of school for a year, sold our house, sold our car, essentially put our life on hold, and we traveled the world with them for an entire year. We saw some incredible things and created some amazing memories, but one of the most remarkable things actually happened in one of the most unremarkable places. It happened right here at an airport. So as we were boarding one of our flights, our 2 oldest kids asked us as we're passing the fancy seats up in the front of the plane, how do we get those seats? So we explained there's really 2 ways to do it. The first way is you pay for it, not gonna happen. The second way is you can ask in the right way at the right time. And sometimes you might just get them given to you for free. So I worked with them. I'm a sales coach, professional. We crafted the pitch. And the next airport that we were at, they mustered up the courage, walked up to the attendant, and asked for a seat in first class. Now, I'm a sales professor, so you can imagine what happened, right? They didn't get it. They did not get it. But they got to meet the pilot, they got a bunch of great snacks, and they had 2 really proud parents. And they learned what take all of us so long to learn, that life's a pitch. Whether you're asking for the upgrade to first class, or you're selling yourself in a job interview, or you're selling your business idea to investors, or asking for a first date, sales skills are life skills. Now, I should know this more than anybody. I mean, I had a career in this as an entrepreneur. I was the salesperson for all those ventures. And yet, the total number of sales courses that I took, rounded up to the nearest whole number and expressed as a percentage, was 0. Which actually isn't all that uncommon. In my homework, I found out that despite the fact that 50% of all college graduates end up in sales at some point in their career, and over 80% of all marketing majors end up in sales immediately upon graduation, less than 5% of higher ed institutions teach sales, which is crazy. It blew my mind. And so that statistic, along with my own experience doing some trial and error selling, compelled me to come teach sales at Ivy. And so I left my career as an entrepreneur, and nowadays I spend my time as a coach, as an advisor, but primarily I identify as a teacher. The course that we launched at Ivy is called Sales Foundations. And look, it looks intimidating, but it's actually become one of the most popular electives at the business school. And the reason is, really there's 3 reasons. The first one is that a handful of students every year come out of the course saying, I love sales. And they choose a career in it, which is fantastic. Most of them don't choose a career, but they come out saying, you changed my perception of sales, which is a win for me. And a handful every single year make my heart sing when they give me feedback like, you helped me become a better version of myself. So my plan today is to teach you some of the lessons that I teach in my classes. And the way that I did that when I first came back to start teaching at Ivy was I didn't want to be just the person that told the stories about the way that things work in industry. I actually wanted a little bit of rigor behind what I was teaching. So what I did was I undertook a research project. I looked at all the academic research dating back to 1918, and I interviewed dozens of sales trainers, managers, best salespeople that I could find, surveyed hundreds of them, and what I came up with was what I think is the secret sauce. And it's actually not that difficult. It's pretty simple, and I want to share the secret sauce with you today. Here's the recipe. It's pretty easy. There's a lot, right? It's pretty overwhelming. But if you boil it all down, actually, and I started to bucket these into a few different categories, really 4 patterns emerged. Success in sales came down to will, skill, strategy, and luck. Those are the 4. Will, skill, strategy, and luck. Will is your ability to work hard and continue despite facing adversity or building resilience. Skill are the sales-specific and general work or life skills that you need to develop to excel in the career. Strategy are the choices that you make, and luck is the invisible force in the world that may give you some positive outcomes or negative outcomes. Will, skill, strategy, and luck. And those four actually formed a really neat equation. And it's will plus skill multiplied by strategy plus luck. And so the first two, will and skill, are additive. You need will or skill. You need one or the other. Both is great, but you need one or the other. You also need strategy or luck. But more of one can make up for a lack of the other. You can have good luck and a bad strategy and still do well. Let me give you an example of this in my life. I was born to a family where my grandfather was a coach and a player at very competitive level in junior hockey. And he had two daughters, one of whom was my mom, and they grew up to be figure skaters, so they weren't the hockey players that my grandpa had hoped for. But then I came along. I was the first grandson. And they were very excited that I was going to be the hockey player. So excited, in fact, that they took out a newspaper ad. Note the first line, that Roger finally had his hockey player. So they put skates on me and brought me out to the ice for the first time when I was 3 years old, and guess what happened? It was awful. It's cold, it's slippery, the ice is hard, you fall down. I cried, I bawled for the full hour. Apparently it was so traumatic for my parents that they never took me out again. And so my grandpa's dreams of me being a hockey player, up in flames. I had absolutely no skill and very little will, and so I was not successful. Contrast this with the experience of my daughter being on skates for the first time, Miss Gracie. We took her out on skates for the very first time, and thankfully I caught it on video, and I'm going to share it with you today. Very first time, never been on skates before. Look at her go. She didn't have the skill. Literally, it's her first time on skates. She couldn't possibly have the skill, but she had the will. So a huge lack of will, or a huge amount of will, can make up for a lack of skill. And exactly what Grace displayed there is exactly what I find happens in sales. Now, each side of the equation is multiplied together. So if you don't have either one on each side, it's not going to work. I don't have a ton of time today, and so my plan is to pick one lesson from each of those buckets that my students tell me every year is meaningful to them, and I want to share those back with you with my remaining time. Lesson number one, resilience is like a muscle. Resilience is like a muscle. There was probably about a couple of years ago, we were sitting at home having a family dinner at around 5:30, and the dreaded knock at the door came. Right? You can hear it. You know what that is, right? The 5:30 dinner time interruption, you know exactly who that is. I heard it in the front row. Salesperson. And that's what most people say. They're like, it's a salesperson. Not I. No, ma'am. I hear that knock at the door at 5:30, and I'm like, it's a salesperson. Here we go. Let's go. I get to have a great conversation. So I march over to the door, and I meet a young man who's launched a new painting business. He's got a painting franchise, and he's trying to drum up some sales. And, of course, asks a lot of great questions. I'm learning about what he's trying to do with his business. Of course, I can't help myself, so I tell him that I teach sales. And smart man, he says, what advice do you have for me as I'm trying to grow my business? Here's the piece of advice that I gave him. Your success in this business is going to depend on your ability to move from porch to porch, rejection to rejection, without losing any enthusiasm. To wipe the slate clean as you move from porch to porch. In essence, I told him that he's got to be resilient, which is both your ability to withstand and recover from the inevitable failures that are going to happen in your life. This is like the lesson that I need to get across to my students when I teach this at Ivy. So I can't do it from standing on a stage or standing in front of the classroom. So I kick them out of the class, and I give them the resiliency challenge, which they hate in the beginning, but they love at the end. So the resiliency challenge is designed to get them purposefully outside of their comfort zone. So I made up a bunch of crazy things for them to do. I make them do things like they need to cut somebody in line. They need to order something that's not on the menu. They need to ask a stranger out on a date. They need to wear a crazy costume to class and just go about their day and pretend like it never happened. By the way, those dates have led to at least a handful of long-term relationships that still go on today. So these resiliency challenges are purposefully designed to get them way outside of their comfort zone. And I designed it based on some really great research done by Dr. Mark Seary on toughening. And the research actually shows that when you do hard things, what doesn't kill you does in fact make you stronger. So lesson number 1 is that resilience is like a muscle. Number 2, questions are the answer. If you've ever heard of in medicine the Hippocratic Oath is this idea that medical professionals are first supposed to do no harm. And in sales, I impose upon my students the sales Hippocratic Oath, which is that you must diagnose before you prescribe. In almost every other profession, a prescription without a diagnosis is malpractice. You would never walk into a doctor, say my knee hurts, and get a prescription, right? The doctor has a process that they go through in order to diagnose the pain, to diagnose the problem. They've got tools, they've got equipment, they ask you questions. The tool that we use in sales to do that is called discovery. And discovery is the process of trying to understand and diagnose the pain or the problem that a customer might have. You should never pitch your solution until you've properly and accurately diagnosed the problem. Questions, when you ask a really good question, is like a Google search. Your mind goes on a Google search for the answer. So I want to give you something that you can use at the next party or networking event that you're at, okay? Imagine you're here talking to somebody new, and ideally you're not just telling them all about yourself. You might ask some questions here and there. Now, I found out that there are universally some questions that we seem to ask almost all the time, and they're universally the questions that people walk away from conversations feeling like blah, like they're not good questions. And you can guess what they are. They are, where are you from? What do you do for work? What are your weekend plans? These blah questions get blah answers. Let me give you some better questions to ask at the next party. What about, are you working on anything exciting? How about, what are you most looking forward to? Or what was the best part of your day or your weekend? Remember, these questions send your mind on a Google search for the answer. And when people find the answers to these questions, they relate the positive emotions to the person that they're having the conversation with. We think that deep conversations make people feel awkward, but the research shows almost exactly the opposite. Deep conversations make people feel more connected, less uncomfortable, and net happier. Questions are the answer. Lesson number 3. It's the best line I've ever learned in sales. We are not for everyone. You think that as you're going for your first job or applying to different schools or trying to grow sales at a business, that we want to blow the doors open. We want to talk to as many people as possible, but that is often the exact opposite thing of what you're supposed to do. In 2015, before I came back to teach at Ivy, I was a chief revenue officer or head of sales for a company called Intellityx. And Intellityx, if you've ever been to any or heard of any major music festival like Coachella or Bonnaroo, we made those RFID wristbands and the technology behind it that allow you to get into the festival and then pay for things all over the event site. So we make the lineups really small for patrons and make more money for organizers. It's kind of a win-win. One of our best partners was a music festival in Belgium called Tomorrowland. Phenomenal festival, world-class organizers. They are the best in the world at what they do. They had had so much success over 20 years that they decided to expand the festival to North America, and so they opened up the US version called Tomorrow World in 2015. They chose a little rural town called Chattahoochee Hills, Georgia, population 3,000, and brought in 150,000 people for that weekend. Now, this is normally not a problem for music festivals. What they do is they construct this giant camping area, which is okay unless torrential downpour, which is exactly what happened that weekend in Chattahoochee Hills. So the campground that was supposed to house about 140,000 people turned into a complete disaster. And the roads to get to and from the festival were not allowing shuttles or Ubers in. There was nowhere for people to go. And so as the main stage on Saturday night let out, all of the patrons, as the wet swampland turned into a wet, freezing swampland, ventured out into the festival grounds and found a place to sleep on the side of the roads, on police cars, and on folding tables. It was a disaster. Now, the organizers did okay, right? They're world class, they're the best at what they do. But it got us thinking as a team. We're working with more and more of these music festivals. We should be careful about who we work with. What if a less experienced organizer was in that situation? We'd actually be in physical danger. So we came up with a list of questions that our team should ask to make sure that the festivals that we were having a conversation with were a good fit to work with. We came up with questions like, how long have you been in operation? How many years of experience does the team have? Who's your stage company, your security company, your sound? Who does your tickets, etc.? Answers to these questions allowed us to make a selection of whether they were a good partner for us, which made us very prepared when I got this email. If you recognize that name, from Fire Festival, the greatest party that never happened. It was supposed to be this VIP music festival on a private island, which turned into absolute chaos. And so we got very specific about the types of customers that we wanted to work with. Today, I do the same thing when I'm working with clients. I think about the Chuck Taylor test. Chuck Taylors are my favorite brand of shoes. And so I say, if I put the logo on a pair of Chuck Taylor shoes, is it a logo that I'd be proud to wear? And if it is, like the TED logo, then I proudly wear the shoes and want to work with that company or with that client. So whatever your version of the Chuck Taylor test is, you are not for everybody. Be specific, not generic. Last thing, you have to get on stage. There exists in our life this really interesting dynamic between two places, the backstage and the onstage. And if I liken it to a musical performance, which is timely because I'm standing in one of my favorite music venues, we've got to think about the balance between the two. The backstage for a musician is where they tune their instrument. It's where they write the lyrics and write the songs, and they get no credit for that. And it's hard. But the onstage is where the magic happens. The onstage is where they sing the song, they recite the poetry, they share the photography, they share their music. It's where you pitch your business idea. It's where you have that job interview. It's where you ask that person out on a date when you think they might be your soulmate. That is your onstage. It is never easy to get on stage, but it is a choice. And I hope today that my framework around will, skill, strategy, and luck makes that transition for you from backstage to onstage just a little bit less intimidating so that you can live the full life that you dream of. Thank you.